Yeah, I was youngest of five children, born and raised in South Philadelphia, a solid blue-collar neighborhood where 95% of all households had a man and a woman raising children. My mother was a housewife. My father worked as a baker. He also one of the first blacks to drive a truck from the train to the dairies. And the white boss said, if you can keep the job, you can have it. So he was a very robust, tough guy, and he kept the job. And it was during the Depression, and if you had a hole in your shoes, you didn't go to your parents and say, well, I need a new pair of shoes. You just take some cardboard and cut it out and put it in. But everyone was in the same situation. We were broke, but we were not poor. If a mother's parents had to go to the store, they would restrict children from going inside the house. Instead, you stayed on the street so that other parents could watch you. So it was like a little village, but on each of the corners, there was a black business, a candy store, or a laundry. So it was really a self-contained community where there was just a tremendous amount of support. My dad died when I was 9 years old. He fought in the First World War in the Harlem Hellcats, but he was wounded in the Black Forest of Germany and died in 1946 as a consequence of these war-related wounds. So he left my mother with a fifth grade education to raise five children, the youngest of which was 9. Which was very stressful for her, which means that she didn't have much time to read to us after school. So I had to turn to friends, but she did equip me with the kind of values that I selected good friends. And so I turned to, there were 6 fellows. There are 3 of us are still alive, and we maintained that friendship, and then they became an extended family. So in one sense, I understand why kids join gangs. One of our fellows that we grew up became very famous. He was Gordon on Sesame Street. If those of you who remember when Sesame Street started, was a black guy with an afro. That was Matt Robinson, one of our fellows. He's the father of Holly Robinson, the actress who's married to Rodney Peake. And so when he died some years ago, first time I went to Hollywood to eulogize him. And so it was quite an experience. But so I grew up in a really tight-knit community, low income, but high values. Everyone went to church. As I said, elderly people could walk safely without fear of being mugged by their grandchildren. I never heard a gun fired or heard of children being shot to death or in any way injured. Most women at that time did not drive cars or smoke. So it was a rich kind of experience. My friends were a year older than me, and so when they graduated in high school, I found myself unaffiliated. So I quit high school in 11th grade and went into the Air Force. I was very close to my dad. Even though I was young, I still have fond memories, even to this day, how loving he was and supportive he was. And so a responsible parent, if they can't give you the kind of love and support that they need, implicitly they give you permission to find it elsewhere. And so I would find it with the fathers of some of my friends. There was one of my friends, Tom Henry, was our scoutmaster, Cub Scouts, and he became a surrogate father. And so when you don't have it in your own home, you're able to take enough of those who love you to find support among other parents. So we became friends with the fathers and mothers of my friends. It's funny, one of my best friends was Paul Badger. When we were 15, we were sitting in the living room playing records, and his mother, Ellen, was walking up the steps, and she looked at us and she said, "Damon and Pythias." I didn't know what it meant, but it stayed in my mind. And when I became an adult, and I read about Damon and Pythias, and it was a story of Greek mythology. They were students of Pythagoras. The king at the time in the myth accused Damien of plotting to kill him, and they sentenced him to death. And so Damien asked the king, I would like to go say goodbye to my family before I die. And so his friend took his place in prison. An hour before he was to be executed, he showed up. And so the king said, never have I seen love and friendship like this. I'm going to pardon you, and I want you to come and teach me how to love the way Damon and Pythias did. And that's the kind of friendships that I developed with this friend, Paul. And so a lot of things that are said to kids, they don't understand it at the time, but as they grow older, they learn to appreciate and value things once they understand. Very profound to understand the importance of friendships and support systems within communities, both parental and peer relationships, particularly peers. Someone said you gotta, in life, take enough from those who love you to deal with those who don't love you. And so I've always taken enough from the friendships that I value, friendships above all else. Friendships to me are synonymous with family because I didn't have that kind of close family. It became the moral equivalent of a family. So I understand a lot about why kids join gangs and whatnot. The community that I was from, their values were evident everywhere. People went to church. Middle class was not how much money you had. The most middle class person was Mr. Johnson, who wore a three-piece suit every day at his barbershop and was the superintendent of the Sunday school and never missed Sunday school, had a little pin on him. And so there were real strong moral and spiritual pillars in the community that served as a moral and spiritual anchor that defined the values. We had strong values of faith and respect for women, and there was just respect. These are the protections that we had. Yeah. But never again, no violence. It wasn't the kind of predatory violence that people almost accept as almost like the new normal today. That didn't exist back. So one cannot say, and this is at a time during segregation. There were public parks that we couldn't attend. There were things, even in the North, that were segregated that you couldn't participate in. And also we had a lot of Masonic organizations that as a kid without a father, I played in the Elks Band, Boys and Girls Club. The churches all had baseball teams and basketball teams. And so there was a rich array of civic institutions within that community that sheltered us from loneliness and isolation and provided a lot of activities. We went to the Royal Theater. We would dress up and go downtown to 13th and South Street, where there was a huge theater with an orchestra pit, where I would see Lionel Hampton Band on a Saturday, or Duke Ellington and Mom's Maberry. This was all owned by the Black community. When you were ill, you went to the Mercy Douglas Hospital. It was a Black-owned hospital. There were two in Philadelphia. And so the Black community, even under segregation, was self-contained. Not people in my neighborhood, but I saw other middle-class Blacks putting golf clubs in their cars and then going over to New Jersey where they played in a Black-owned country club. And so growing up, even from a distance, even though you were not a direct participant, you appreciated that there was that kind of economic and diversity within the Black community. You saw everything you needed was there. These values were cherished, and they were respected, and they were taken for granted. That's what defined that era. Yeah. First of all, like I say, there's a difference between broke and being broken. What I have experienced, even when I left and went into the military, The military was a great integrator of people, man. It compelled you all of a sudden. I grew up believing that black people were a majority in America because my reality was my neighborhood, and that's all I saw was black folks, and I saw occasional white people. And so it was, even though in school, in geography, we knew what demographics were, but those are abstractions. Your reality informs you more than what you learn from reading. And so what the Air Force really, when I went into 1954 at age 17, compelled me to live with people. I heard white people with Southern accents and people from Oklahoma and all over. We were Polish, Italian, Jewish. All of this was a melting pot. And then I was taken from New York to Mississippi for airborne electronics training. So I saw racism in the raw there. But again, even though we had to shelter together, what united us was a common sense of self-respect and values that we never succumbed to the external environment. It didn't change who we were. When I came back, those values that I grew up with were still intact, but it changed in the 60s, of course, is that even under segregation, families' values were intact. In other words, racism was not in us. I think it was Chuck Swindoll said, 10% of who we are is defined by our external circumstance. 90% is our attitude about the 10%. And so we were clear about that back in those times, and it was accepted as a pervasive set of values. And so that the decline didn't come as a consequence of external. In one sense, we were better off under segregation in terms of human capital in the black community than we are today. No, we pretty much stayed to ourselves, and we knew that we couldn't go into certain amusement parks and things like that, and we accepted it, and it didn't bother us that much. We didn't have much interaction. Most of it was just internal. And so it equipped you with a sense of self-value. And so when I went to Mississippi, I realized that I'm not defined by what someone says about me. In other words, what I say to people, it's not what people call you that is important. It's what you respond to that determines who you are. I knew who I was. And so therefore, whatever I was called, it didn't pertain to me. But also I realized that for every white person who really verbally assaulted me, or even in some cases I was locked up in the South for raising civil rights issues on the base. They would conspire with the local police, and I would get picked up on a Friday night when we got paid on Monday because they knew I couldn't post bond of $35, and so therefore I was going to go to jail. And that made me very bitter that I had to do that, but I never generalized that to all white people, because for every person who was vile like that and assaultive, I found a white friend who was not like that. So I never generalized the evil being visited upon me by a small group of people. Even the institutions that I was in, I was able to individualize it and not allow that evil to establish itself inside of me. And so I've always been very clear about that. But the Air Force also gave me an opportunity. I finished my GED in the Air Force, and I took courses at night at the University of Miami. So I have 12 credits in mathematics from the University of Miami when I couldn't walk on the campus. But the Air Force accommodated that and provided an opportunity for me to learn. And so I was in the space program, flew the first Earth satellite attempt, and I learned from the engineers how to not only compute the data from the missile shoots that we were on, but some of the white scientists invited me into the lab and taught me how to compute the data that I was collecting. But some of the white officials in my squadron found out that I was doing that and forbid me to participate. They also started to fly me on nights that I had classes. So I had to go to my commander and complain, and then he, a white guy, Gus Askunas, Colonel Askunas, told my squadron leader to ground me on nights that I had classes. So I set up a dynamic where I was protected, but in the course of being protected, I was assaulted more by these crazy ways of getting. But again, you learn the push and pull. The major, I guess, message is you don't succumb to what's happening to you. You're not defined by it. And so I've always stayed focused on being who I need to be and take all I can from situations to make life more successful for myself. In 54 to 58, I was flying missile test control. In other words, we went to, whenever the missile was going to be fired, we went up in a reconnaissance plane with airborne electronic equipment, and we orbited around so that if we were all equipment in the missile we had on our plane, and so we were able to record in case the missile had to blow up. We had a recording of what went wrong, and so we were able to do that for about 3.5 years. I was one of the first blacks to be in a situation like that. Well, when I got out of the military and got involved in, I was going to get a degree in math and science. General Electric had offered me a job because of my space experience. And I started working at a juvenile jail, working locked behind 3 doors with 65 juveniles with no program, just 2 of us. And they were the same kind of kids I grew up with, some of them. And I knew how to maneuver that situation. And I had a burning bush experience before I knew what a burning bush was. And that I used to take the kids to unsupervised areas of the prison once the administration had gone. I'd collect money from other guards so I could give treats to my young people. And one day when we were in this unsupervised area of the prison, I was getting the 4 kids to clean up. All 65 kids stood up and applauded me. And I just lost it, man. I couldn't let them see me crying. So I turned on my heels and walked out. The stuff was flying everywhere. And I didn't know I thought I was going crazy. Then I realized that the Holy Spirit was speaking to me before I knew what the Holy Spirit was. And it said that I must spend the rest of my life serving this population. So when I came back, there were 6 of those kids that I would have adopted if I had the money to do so, because I knew that they were there because of their victim of their circumstance. Their character was intact, but they were just living in the wrong situation. So I was determined from that day on to devote the rest of my life serving that population. I was going to answer that call that I heard in that prison. And so then I redirected my professional training and accepted a full scholarship to the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Work, because I realized that loving somebody sometimes isn't enough. Love has to be dispensed in a way that's disciplined, and that it's not sloppy, but it's disciplined love. And so I sought to get professional guidance so that I could be a better steward of this responsibility that I had to serve. And then that got me into the social welfare system, and I realized then how government, in the name of helping people, were destroying them. Particularly when I got into Child Protective Services for 2 years. These are helping kids who were abandoned and abused by their parents, I realized that they were more abused by the system that was there to help them than many times the circumstance they were in. Some examples, children between the ages of 3 and 5, when they go into the foster care system because they're abandoned, neglected by parents, but they don't have any psychological dysfunction. But by policy, these kids are moved from home to home so they won't bond with a foster parent, so they can be easily, resettled. But what happened was the more the kids move, the more they deteriorate in their behavior, the higher the reimbursement from the state is to the agency. So a child is getting, the provider, the agency is getting $10,000 a year of child in foster care. But if it acts out, then it goes into psychiatric foster care, and that's now, a rate is $15,000, and then it goes into a group, then that's $25,000. So the more the child deteriorates as a consequence of the neglect of the agency, the higher the reimbursement. We buy clothes for kids coming into the system, but when they're ready to return to their parents and it's the beginning of winter, we're prohibited from buying clothes for them. But we will buy clothes when we put them in the foster. So there are a lot of small policies and practices that undermine families. A woman has a 12-year-old babysitting while she goes grocery shopping. Agency comes in, accuses her of takes the kids and put them in foster care. She says, why not just give me a fraction of that to hire a babysitter to watch my kids so I can go shopping? No, we can't pay for that, but we can pay to take them from you and place them in care. So it was me witnessing an accumulation of these policies that are being done by the government that end up injuring somebody with the helping hand. And that took me in this attitude about the civil rights movement. And then, of course, I saw that in mass in the 60s when I was leading civil rights demonstrations in Westchester, Pennsylvania, the home of Barrett Rustin. They were picketing outside of we picketed outside a pharmaceutical company. And when they hired 9 black PhD chemists, we asked them to join our movement. They said they got these jobs because they were qualified. So I realized then that the bait and switch game was going on, where we used the demographics of poor blacks as the bait, and the switch comes when the money arrives. And that has been a consistent pattern starting back in the mid-'60s till today. So we have created a commodity out of poor people where we spent $22 trillion, with 70 cents every dollar goes not to the poor, but those who serve the poor. The providers ask not which problems are solvable, but which ones are fundable this year. And so you got the middle-class blacks with college education. They are prospering at the expense of low-income people, but they use race to conceal this exploitation. I would say it was 1964, 65. I got really involved in the movement when I deposed a leader in Westchester, Pennsylvania, at age 25, and got voted in as president of the Human Relations Council. That was the big civil rights organization at the time. I deposed a guy and I took over and began to lead demonstrations. But again, on the issue of forced busing for integration, I parted company with the civil rights movement. They said to me, well, you're taking the same position as the Ku Klux Klan and the John Birch Society. And I said, if Hitler likes classical music and I do too, am I supposed to stop liking classical music? You either stand for truth, no matter who agrees or disagrees, or you don't. And so that set me apart from the civil rights movement. On the issues of, Dr. King said, what difference does it make if you have the opportunity to eat where you choose or live where you want to, if you don't have the means to exercise that right? So I realized that opportunity is not just defined by resources. It's helping people to prepare to walk through the doors of opportunity, to take advantage of them. And the civil rights movement was not interested in that. And so that's why a big class schism occurred that continues to this day. The biggest income gap isn't between whites and blacks, it's blacks and blacks. And my position is if racism were all pervasive cause of our problems, then why not all blacks suffering equally? But there's huge gaps, and it continues to this day. That's why I left the civil rights movement following the death of Dr. King to work on behalf of low-income people of all races. Yes, I did. Yeah, I had the opportunity 3 months before he died. See, people don't realize that when Dr. King and Baird Rustin would come through, they would bring the press, and then that would give us a forum, local leaders, to articulate the problems that we had in our area. So they were very effective in bringing the press. So then we would seize that as an opportunity to bring people out, and then we would emphasize our positions. But this is important. I was about ready to leave the movement. And when Dr. King was killed, Westchester started to burn. And I got a call. I was 10 miles away. And they said, Bob, we need you back here because the city's getting ready to burn. It's blowing up. And so when I drove back into the city, I saw that there were lots of young people on the streets angry. But what I did was I didn't go to other civil rights officials. I went to some 5 grassroots leaders that I had relationships with. And I said, we got to get on top of this. We can't allow this to burn. They each got in their cars and we met. And we imposed ourselves between the National Guard, the police, and the rioters. And because of these 5 men that I had recruited, who were well known, had social trust and moral authority in that community, we persuaded the young people not to continue the violence. And then we gave them a forum. We said, let's meet at the community center tomorrow so we can air your grievance. I realized then that poor blacks were not a part of the civil rights movement because the people out on that street were not ones attending civil rights meetings. And when Amos Brown, who is a very famous pastor now, was the head of the NAACP, he came out in his collar. The kids almost attacked him. I had to push him in a door well in back of me and told him, please go home because you're going to get me killed. And so I realized at that point that the people with moral authority and social trust in a crisis are grassroots leaders. These were the ones that could stand before hundreds of marauding teens and say, we are going to be peaceful. So that we didn't lose any lives in Westchester. Some stores burned, but we didn't lose any lives. And then when we told everybody word of mouth, we wanted to meet at the community center because the people in the street need to have their views aired. 500 people showed up at the community center. And I was working with these 5. They said, well, Bob, we want you to be our spokesperson. I said, no. You are the leaders. I can help you put your agenda together. But you need to say to city council, you're not coming down there. They need to come to you. And then you need to articulate what your grievances are. So I helped them to articulate their grievances and demands that they wanted to make, demands that would meet their needs. And I thought of myself as a liaison between the civil rights movement and the local Black Action Committee, they called themselves. And I said, no, this is your movement, not mine. But because of this break, I got attacked by the civil rights leaders. They said, oh, you're just manipulating them. I said, do you believe that I can manipulate this? That's disrespecting the people, not celebrating me. You are disrespecting. Then I realized then that a lot of the middle-class traditional leadership had no respect for grassroots Josephs. And in fact, looked with disdain on them. And so that radicalized me. And from that day to this day, I was committed to using whatever talents and skills I have to be an agent for these grassroots leaders. Well, because the civil rights movement changed when the poverty programs came in, they became elected officials with the promise that if you elect black folks to these offices of the mayor and whatnot, we would treat our people better than whites did. But when the poverty programs came in, they were administering these poverty programs. This became a source of patronage for themselves, and so I witnessed the patronage. So they went into these cities, and they began to hire their friends in the movement and give them jobs, give them contracts, poverty program, when they had no. I just witnessed that the Westminster Association was the biggest social poverty agency in Los Angeles, and what happened is that the first year of the poverty programs, they were hiring grassroots leaders. But some of these grassroots leaders began to challenge local political leadership. So the local political leadership said, oh no, we need to have this, get on top of this. So the Office of OEO, Office of Economic Opportunity, overnight changed the poverty program. They said any community outreach worker has to have a college degree. That one policy changed the whole poverty programs because they then made certain that only professionally trained people would be the principal beneficiaries and stewards of the poverty program, and all of the people who were uncredentialed would no longer serve, and that became a pervasive policy that exists to this day. And so poor blacks became a commodity that was exploited by the middle-class leadership. That's why you've had these same civil rights leaders who became political mayors and whatnot. Most of the decline in the black community that has occurred over the last 50 years have occurred in cities run by their own people. And that's a disturbing reality.